Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Steven Kelley, and this is the Steven Kelley Show. We are Truthcat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com. It's now October 23rd. It's now 6:02 p.m. The title of tonight's show, yep, I've actually got a title, is King, Dictator, Despot, comma. I know. I'll explain. All right. Obviously, in spite of, I feel bad if I don't have good content, but, it's like my motivation's at an all-time low for obvious reasons. I don't even, the whole reason for doing this mission is because I want these guys to kill me and because I want revenge. And now I want more revenge. And so, yes, revenge is a driving force, but, the constant heartbreak thing or reoccurring thing, that's I'm a walking heart attack, let's just put it this way. So, and I'll probably write DNR on my ID, just so hotshot don't get any wise ideas. But either way, life goes on, and I'll tell you, I got money came in on my little green card, the one that the government gives me now, so the Palantir can keep track of what I do with my meager Social Security income, my fixed income. And I noticed it showed up yesterday, which was kind of cool. So I thought, hey, I'm going to go run down and get myself some medicine, so life isn't quite so painful. I could kill myself with that, haha. Kidding. So I thought, well, I better get in the shower. And that way I won't offend the little bud tenders when I cruise down to the dispensary. And as usually typically happens in this situation, I'm in the shower and suddenly Source says, hey, your show, this is going to be your title, King, Dictator, Despot. I'm like, oh, pardon me. I'm like, okay. Yeah, I guess I can remember that. All right. I'm thinking, do I have to start researching that now or can I wait until tomorrow? I thought, well, I'll cheat. I'll ask Grok. I'll see what Grok says. Then I'll go back to Wikipedia and I'll dive into it and see where Source leads me to. It never fails. Oh my gosh. So, as is the case typically with these types of shows, and I hope you will listen to the end, and obviously if you're not here now, but it's just a recording, that you'll appreciate someday in the future and learn with me this lesson that we're supposed to be learning. What's the difference? And I'll tell you, as I dove into this, as usual, it took me in a bunch of different directions, and I learned a lot of historical details and society details and prejudices and things of this, bias, distortion, censorship, the typical thing. And once you see that, you know it's something important. But either way, so I dug into it. Now, of course, to me, this means something because in the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, the final verse mentions the king/despot of the world, of the blood of Zion, essentially the Antichrist in so many words. So these are important concepts to be understanding, because if we can understand the basis of these three concepts, then we can go on and understand the concepts of fascism, a police state, communism, Bolshevism, and such. And perhaps even, well, what's missing here from this picture? Well, I digress. But I want to start out with something that kind of brings me into all this. Oh, I know, the Antichrist. That's what I was going to recommend to say. And that is this constant reoccurring phenomena, which is projection. which is done mostly by these insane power mongers and the people in power now. And obviously, whenever we're told anything anymore by people who would be rulers, they project, and they tend to always say the opposite of the reality, much like Joseph Goebbels when he so famously said, "Accuse your enemies of that which you are guilty." Now, a lot of people would assume that he's talking about himself, but no. That's what they are doing also. So anyway, obviously with Trump here getting ready to start a war in Venezuela, I mean, this just pisses me off because, first of all, we know what he is, and who he works for, and we'll just say mafia for the time being. But he's going after Maduro in Venezuela. Now he wants to go after Colombia, Gustavo Petro. And he's calling these guys narco-terrorists, and all this bullshit. He's basically pot-calling hell black, saying these guys are all smuggling drugs into the United States, this sort of thing. Of course, I find this very distasteful because I actually worked for the Oliver North Gang, and I know all about the Intertel Mafia and the drug cartels that they control that actually do smuggle the drugs into the United States, and the CIA, which works as complicit, and the NSA, which works complicit in how they oppress all of the competition so that they are the only ones in the business. And so this concept of blowing up drug boats and saying that 25,000 Americans are going to live and not die because some drug boat was blown up, alleged drug boat, it's insane. Overexertion of power, kind of thing a dictator might do. Anyway, and then there's Peter Thiel, and he says that anybody that exhibits hate for AI is in league with the Antichrist. They keep bringing up this Antichrist thing. He keeps pushing that shit. So obviously, they either are the Antichrist, which so many people want to compare Donald Trump to because of his behavior, or they are indeed in league with the Antichrist, which we know is actually the case. But we have to discuss that now. And what is it with their infatuation with the Lord of the Rings, which is fiction, of course, and yet at the same time, the use of names like Palantir, or even the new startup company that's selling weapons to Ukraine called Anduril, which is the name of the sword used by, what's his face? Aragorn. I believe that's him. Yeah. Anyway, the king that returns, the return of the king. He used that. That was his weapon. Okay, so there's all this symbolism. King's weapon was Anduril. It happens to be making drones that are going to Ukraine. Anyway, so this is wild stuff. But I went to Grok, and of course we know that Grok is just going to give us some twisted interpretations based on what they want you to hear. So I said, Grok, define for me a king, a dictator, and a despot. Tell me how they are different and how they are similar to each other. So he says, definitions. A king is a hereditary monarch who rules over a kingdom or nation, typically as part of a monarchical system. The position is often passed down through family lines, and a king's authority is derived from tradition, divine right, or constitutional frameworks. Such in the situation with a constitutional monarchy, not to be confused with a constitutional despotism. And according to Grok, in modern context, many kings are ceremonial figures with limited real power, such as constitutional monarchies in the United Kingdom. Now, why do they have limited powers? Because of the Magna Carta, because King John was being called a despot. So everybody got together and by force of arms, essentially had a coup and said, you're going to sign this document, and that's going to put controls on you so you cannot be a despot. Because a despot is a dirty word. Okay, dictator. A dictator is a ruler who holds absolute power over state, usually obtained through force. Remember, state's a key word here. A coup or manipulation, like stealing an election, rather than a democratic election. What the fuck is this word democrat? Again, that their word is a abomination or an inheritance. Dictators often suspend or ignore laws and institutions to maintain control, i.e., Magna Carta. And their rule can be temporary, like in ancient Rome, or short-term, or indefinite, like Benito Mussolini or Fidel Castro. Now, a despot, according to Grok, is a ruler who exercises absolute power in a cruel, oppressive, or tyrannical manner, often abusing authority for personal gain without regard for the welfare of the subjects. The term emphasizes arbitrary and harsh governance, dare I say cruel, and it can apply to various forms of rule, including monarchies or dictatorships. Historically, it was used for rulers in ancient Greece or the Ottoman Empire who wielded unchecked power. All right, now again, I'm not saying this is true because I'm gonna have to check this. I'm gonna have to come back, but I'm gonna just continue with his definitions here. Differences. A source of power and legitimacy. A king typically inherits power through bloodline or royal succession. These are key important details, with legitimacy rooted in historical, cultural, or legal traditions. Magna Carta, legal. Dictator seizes power through non-hereditary means such as military force and political maneuvering, lacking traditional legitimacy or relying on coercion, kind of like the Shah of Iran. A despot's power can come either through inheritance or seizure, but the key distinction is the tyrannical exercise of it, which is bullshit. This is prejudice right there. Focusing on the abusive nature rather than the origin. Okay. And then they go on with duration. And of course, this is prejudice. Kings often rule for life, stable system. Dictators may rule temporarily or permanently. Despots are defined more by their oppressive style than duration. Connotation. King carries a neutral or positive connotation in many cultures. Dictator is generally negative, implying authoritarianism or suppression of freedoms, while despot is the most pejorative. That means negative, highlighting cruelty and exploitation, often used synonymously with tyrant. Now, again, this is all semantics. Where does this come from? And no, semantics and Semite, according to Grok, is not connected. Accordingly to Grok, the term Semite comes from the tribe of Shem, and semantics comes from a Greek word meaning sema or inform, something of this nature. I kind of think that. I call bullshit on that. Anyway, let's see. The similarities, concentration of power, potential for abuse, historical overlap, impact on society. And I said, hold on. This is my second question. Of course, you only get three. I said, why do you assume that a despot is always cruel and not benevolent? The definition does not insist on cruelty. That is a stereotype. Of course, Grok is like, oh, stupid machines. Like, let's see, you're right to challenge the assumption of a despot is always cruel. The core definition doesn't strictly require cruelty. No shit, Grok. And stereotype of malevolence can oversimplify the concept. Very much so. That's why we're having this show tonight. Let me clarify and address your point by revisiting. Well, again, now he gives a couple examples here because this is typically all they can do. A computer like this. They can only look at historical examples because they're not unique individuals, much like a Antichrist. They say, again, a despot is a ruler who exercises absolute power in an arbitrary or unrestrained manner without institutional checks or accountability. like a Magna Carta. The term derives from Greek, despots, master or lord, and I historically referred to rulers with unchecked authority, such as ancient Greek city-states or Byzantine emperors. And this is important because the Greeks and the Byzantines play a big role in all this. He mentions rulers like Ivan the Terrible or Nero. Arbitrary rule, absolute. But then they visit the concept of benevolent despot. Absolute power, but uses it to enact policies perceived as beneficial. We have Frederick the Great of Prussia. He centralized power, sidelined nobility, and ruled autocratically, but implemented reforms like improving education, promoting religious tolerance, and modernizing agriculture. So he was a good leader. He didn't abuse it. Catherine the Great of Russia, one of the greatest leaders, of course, historically, and also very important because we have to pursue her history a little bit. And while autocratic, she pursued Enlightenment-inspired reforms such as legal codification, educational expansion, and though her benevolence was inconsistent and self-serving at times, supposedly, that's their interpretation. I mentioned the guy Leon Kuan Yew of Singapore. He was not a despot in the classical sense. He was more of a benevolent dictator. Why the cruelty persists? Absolute power, blah, blah, blah. King, dictator, power seized, benevolent or not. What's going on here? Cat, put it up. A cat going nuts behind me. Anyway, I want to look at this a little bit more because it turns out was everything that we know, it's kind of an East versus West type of a situation. The word Oriental comes up. In this case, Oriental is like not synonymous with the East. But if we go back to, say, Alexander the Great, when they had whatever it was, form of government, obviously Spartans were probably more fascist and despotic in nature, but the rest of them, the Athenians and whatnot, they considered themselves democratic, but they were really more of a republic because democracy is really a perversion of republicanism. But in the conquest going east, of course, he had to deal with Persia. And in Persia, he faced an enemy, the armies of Osiris, or not, was Osiris? The other guy. Can't remember. You must be, yeah, whatever his name was, that guy. I only ask that you kneel. Yeah, what was his name? Anyway, the point is that ever since the time of Alexander the Great and his experiences with the armies of, say, there it is again, the Persians, and even the Indian government for whoever it was, but he found what he considered slaves rather than citizens fighting for their king. He felt that they were slaves that were being commanded to fight and by a ruler. And that's true. So how did they define it? They called that eventually, and the term actually come into use in Europe as Oriental despotism. Believe it or not, that's a thing. Oriental despotism. Now let me just go up my little list of goodies that I had brought down here, so I could try to give it to you in a good way. But this concept of Oriental despotism basically originated with Aristotle. And of course, I suppose Alexander was the original that started it, but it developed with Aristotle, and certainly you could say that Plato carried it on with his fascism philosophy and his idea of an ideal state, an elite class of rulers. that would basically rule for the benevolent rulers that would rule for the sake of everybody. And he also rejected the concept of equality, much the same way that people that believe in democracy, which is of course a tool that was foisted upon us by our enemies to allow the voices of the idiots to be measured equally with the voices of the wise. And of course, the voices that get amplified are the foolish ones, and the ones coming from the wise people are the ones that are censored, etc., by this great, well, what shall we call it? I guess the best thing to call it nowadays is, what's a data cartel? So much I want to say. Anyway, when I look at Catherine the Great, I find out that she was a student of a guy named Montague. And Montague wrote a book. Well, before I mention Montague, I should mention there was another book written called Oriental Despotism, and this became basically a guideline for the conservatives in trying to define this East-West thing. But before that, back to Montague, he wrote a book. Let me see if I can find the cover of it. And nope, not there. No. But it became kind of the basis for government. And Catherine the Great studied it, as well as many others. But what he did was he said that the government could basically be divided down into three basic groups. And he listed those groups as a king, monarchy, let me get this right, a despot, or a dictator. Oh, let me make sure I get this right. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Montague. He said that political institutions need, for their success, to reflect the social and geographical aspects of the particular community. Okay, now the idea of reflecting the aspects of what the community needs, that's like the concept of, MAGA, Make America Great, America First. That falls into the guidelines of this concept. Your rulers are supposed to have your best, your needs and your best wishes only for you. Anyway, he had three classifications, three kinds. He said Republican, monarch, or despot. And he says that the Republican political systems they vary depending on how broadly they extend citizenship rights, and those that extend citizenship relatively broadly, those are considered democratic republics. Kind of like no borders, let all the illegal aliens in and let them vote. That's the Democrats. That would be called broad citizenship. And the opposite of that, of course, the people who restrict citizenship more narrowly are termed aristocratic republics. That's what we're supposed to be. Of course, the word aristocratic is obviously meant to throw you off and make you think this is a bad thing. And this distinction between monarchy and despotism hinges on whether or not a fixed set of laws exists that can restrain the authority of the ruler. If so, the regime counts as a monarchy, and if not, it counts as a despotism. So then, right away, they're suggesting that unless this king, this monarch, has some sort of parliament or some sort of device like a Magna Carta to control them and to make sure that they can't abuse their divine rights of power to do things like arbitrary judgment and arbitrary punishment, or taking the possessions of one of the citizens of the monarch. Now remember, in a kingdom, in an ideal monarchy situation, the monarch is a paternal figure to all of the people. The people are considered the children of the monarch. All the power, all the possessions, everything belongs to the monarch. But much the same way a father shares his possessions with his children, the same way the monarch shares his possessions with the people, his children. This is the ideal situation. This is the definition of a benevolent monarch. So in other words, a true benevolent monarch is someone that owns everything and yet owns nothing. Kind of like Christ would be. Christ is king. We got to remember to talk about that because remember, they don't say Jesus is king, they say Christ is king. This is very important when we start talking about an antichrist. Well, now here's the thing also. All of these different types of systems require or use different motivations to keep people loyal or working in the best interest of the control structure. And of course, they say that in a democratic republic, or to a lesser extent for aristocratic republics, it's the love of virtue, doing the right thing, that's supposed to make you want to put your interest of the community ahead of your own interests. In a monarchy, you're supposed to be motivated by honor or the desire to attain greater rank and privilege, perks, status, fame. Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord. As you wish, my lord. Per the whatever they said, the majesty. Anyway. And then for despots, they say it's all about the fear of the ruler, the fear of consequences to authority. Now it's important here that we look at all three of these things so we can compare these. If this is the ruler, then you could take any ruler, even like when I say ruler, I'm talking about a so-called leader like Trump. So, virtue. Are people working for Trump out of desire of virtue? Perhaps. Is that MAGA? Perhaps. What about honor, rank, and privilege? Well, they're certainly working for Trump for rank and privilege because he has no problem with giving people like Miriam Adelson medals and stuff like that. Unless, of course, you're Charlie Kirk. Then they'll give you a medal and a street named after you and a national holiday, but that's what they did for Martin Luther King after they killed him, huh? Anyway. Now, I say that this concept of a despotism, this fear of the ruler, this fear of consequences to authority, maybe instead of authority, we should replace some of this with something like fear of God. What happened to the monarchy when the monarch was the appointed ruler, the blood of the whatever, the royal blood? Where did that royal blood come from? Very often it came from apostles or from the 12 tribes of Israel. Some sort of connection. Most royal blood traces its way back to Adam and Eve and beyond. One way or the other. That's what I've learned. Either way, this so-called biblical, if you will, holy connection is very key. And this is the nature of this entire concept of serving at the grace of God, serving for God, having genetics of the sort that makes you predisposed to doing this job because you do have the superior intellect that you are gifted with for this purpose. So why do the Jews hate this so much? Why do the protocols, why do they want to kill the kings? Why is that so important? I kind of missed another thing. There's so much here that I want to tell you that's so hard for me to remember. Oh, that's right, Solomon. You know where you didn't get any royal bloodline? You didn't get any bloodline from Solomon. You didn't get any royal bloodline from David. People want to say they're related to David. Is that right? The royal bloodline of Solomon died. What there was only, let's see, what was it? In the north, the northern part, the part that only had two of the tribes. The southern part, the part next to Phoenicia, that had the 10 tribes. The 19 kings that followed Solomon weren't related to Solomon, starting with the first guy that took over from Solomon. What was his name? Jeroboam? Rehoboam? I get those guys mixed up. I think it was Jeroboam. But you think he was the son of Solomon? No, he was like one of his generals, or he wasn't even that. He was like his top aide or some crap, his chauffeur, chariot driver. Such was the nature of the royal blood of Israel before it was conquered by the Assyrians and scattered and became the Khazars and the Turks and everything else, the wonderful people that like to commit genocide. The Orients, if you will. Amazing, isn't it? Before I go any further, I'm just going to read you that final line from the Protocols of Learned Elders of Zion, the Orients. Ever since that time, we have been leading the peoples from one disenchantment to another, so that in the end they could turn also from us in favor of that king despot of the blood of Zion, whom we are preparing for the world. There is a king despot that is coming. Don't shun it. Does that mean it is the blood of Zion? Is that a bad thing? How many times do we have to look in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, where we see Israel being cast out and cast aside and rejected and divorced because of their sins and their continued sins of their fathers, like all the people that preceded Solomon, how they continued to sacrifice humans like they do today? That has never changed. So again, this concept of this negative connotation of a despot. Obviously, king/despot is being used in the Protocols. That must be bad, right? This despot must be bad. Can it be possible that there's a benevolent despot? Could it happen? Possibly. This cruel despot that they're waiting for, this cruel king of Zion, who is that supposed to be? The Antichrist. That's what they think it is. And who is it selected by? The so-called elders of Zion, the 12 elders that rule from under the Getty. Those guys, those leaders, those evil spirits in dark places. Why do they hate kings so much? Why are they trying to destroy kings? Why are they so pro-democracy? Because you can't control a benevolent king. You can only control a cruel king. You can only control by masses of idiots in a democratic society, so-called democratic society. But if we look at this word despot even closer, before we even get into this concept of Oriental despotism, there's another concept called hydro-despotism, which is also related to agrarian societies. And back in the old days, a lot of societies were agrarian. But we have to remember also that the word despot was synonymous with the word emperor in the Byzantine Empire under Constantine. Emperors and leaders under the Byzantine Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, were called despots. That was what they called them. There was nothing evil. There was no negative connotation. It was like calling God Allah. It's the same word. Different cultures. Same word, different culture. So right away we know that the prejudice of Alexander and the Greeks towards the so-called Persians, this concept of the soldiers that were just slaves and not citizens, that was something that stuck. And when the Vatican went against the so-called East and severed its relations with the Eastern Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, as created by Constantine, everything was bad, just like all the other apostles other than Peter were suddenly bad, heretics, schismatic. All of a sudden, suddenly the word despot is dirty, it's evil, wicked. Is it? No. We know better now. There's so much Bible that I'd like to read to you right now, but I don't really want to. But I wanted you to see the connection to Trump and some of these labels, because a lot of you like to think of Trump as being some sort of potential antichrist. And sure, he fits the bill in many respects with his deceit and his wars and his ego and the horribleness he's doing. And we've got to talk about that damn ballroom bunker they're building. But I did run across a line from a book, and it's a relatively modern book, similar to George Orwell, but this has having to do with the concept of a police state. And in this book, they have a definition. They said, a police state is a state whose government institutions exercise an extreme level of control over civil society and liberties. There is typically little to no distinction between the law and the exercise of political power by the executive, and the deployment of internal security and police forces play a heightened role in governance. Now, that may seem like lines out of a book, but we can see this is exactly what Trump is doing. Very much so. Obviously. So yeah, we're more of a police state. And of course, was a police state but a capitalist system in decline. They do that on purpose. There's another line from this book, a little quote, which I think is also very, very applicable to our current situation. And it goes like this. It says, infested with the inescapable surveillance industry, the 5 global affiliations manipulated big data to commodify and commercialize all human activity for profit. The affiliations had subordinated states to their dominion. George Orwell got it wrong. Big Brother did not come from a totalitarian state, but from a totalitarian non-state. Big Data was a relentless cybernetic grandmaster who, with sneaky eyes and listening ears, spied on everything. Your clothes, your friends, recording every word you spoke or wrote. It kept account of all this and more to amass the info power it needed to control the market, the heartbeat of the money economy. So, big data. Is that not the Intertel Mafia in 2 words, other than Intertel Mafia? Is that not what we're looking at with Palantir? Sure looks like it, huh? You know, there's another thing I found, I think, that was extremely biased regarding the definitions in Wikipedia and Grok and what have you, which comes with, no surprise. But when I tried to learn about fascism, now I had learned about fascism pretty well from a political scientist, a Czechoslovakian political scientist, a guy who was kind of a Marxist, but at the same time, his definition of fascism was actually pretty right on, and he talked about how capitalism is integral to the concept. But in Wikipedia, if you look it up, you get down to the bottom of their definition and everything, they talk about what, they're trying to come up with excuses, but here's a line from it. They said, the conditions of economic hardship caused by the Great Depression brought about an international surge of social unrest. Fascist propaganda blamed the problems of the long depression of the 30s on minorities and scapegoats. Here we go. Victims, Judeo-Masonic, Bolshevik conspiracies. Left-wing internationalism and the presence of immigrants. Gosh, presence of immigrants. Even back then, huh? Wow. Only not like that's going on today, huh? Wow. By the boatloads or, truckloads or trainloads or whatever you want to call it. Wow. Okay, Judeo-Masonic Bolshevik conspiracies. They're only conspiracies, folks. None of it's true. And yet, when we look at this despotism concept and we learn about so-called the roots of it, we find there's entire cultures based on this, like Oriental despotism or what they call hydro-despotism, where somebody controls the water and you don't live if you don't comply. That's where that comes from. And a lot of people think that's wonderful. Like those people that go to China and say, wow, we got to be like China. Let's get our social credit system up, like with Palantir, where everybody's polite and everybody complies and everybody's going to bow down to the state. In this case, the state is what? Big data. Well, I want to remind you all that this ballroom Trump's building, where in the fuck does he get off thinking that he can tear down the East Wing? Seriously, all those years, that is a historical structure. That is not his house. That's our house. Who gave him the permission to tear part of it down so he could build his dance hall? But apparently we know from the example of Hitler that when you see your leaders building dance halls and big flat floors with empty rooms on top, that means bunkers going in underneath. They're expanding the bunker. Big surprise. The Führer bunker's getting built bigger. Kind of like the Wunderwaffen weapons that are being promised to Zelensky. It's that bad. It's getting towards the end there. But hey, Freemasonry, it's not Jewish. Is it Jewish? Of course it's Jewish. Is it satanic? Of course it's satanic. Bolshevism. Who invented Bolshevism? The same people invented Zionism at the same time, at the same place. But hey, don't be prejudiced. So what's my point of all this? My point is, that Christ is king. There's only one king, and it's Christ. This great despot of the blood of Zion is not an evil thing. It's not an antichrist, but it is inevitable. And it's not an entity selected by the wicked elders of Zion. But it is the person that can take control of all of it. And is there a royal connection? Yes, of course. As I've said so many times. But here's the thing, and according to the elders, the Zion, the king, the elder, whoever it is, this great despot, is supposed to be cruel, supposed to not have children, and supposed to only be chosen by them. We know that's not the case. You know what else we know? We don't say Jesus is king, we say Christ is king. Why? Because Jesus was the human and Christ is the eternal entity that Jesus became. That great argument of the divine nature of Jesus, that's what that is. So when Christ returns, will it be Jesus? No, it will be Christ. Christ has always been king. It never changes. The king will return, the return of the king. There's that symbology. That's what we need to get ready for. And we need to know that when that happens, you will have a benevolent despot. You will have a society that works as all these societies where you will want to do the right thing, like a republic or a democracy. You will want the perks, the honors, and the glory, like you do with a monarchy. And at the same time, you will be in fear of the authority. As they say, you will be in fear of God, not because of the all-powerful control of this person who has accessed all that technology and has the ability to do almost anything, including ultra reality. But the ultimate fear is the fear of your judgment when you go before God in heaven and you face your judgment. That fear is gone. That fear needs to come back, and it will return with the return of the king. Whether that king is here or not, but we know one thing. It ends with a Getty. All right? Anyway, folks, I did my best to get my message out to you, I think, tonight. Let me see if there's anything I forgot. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about Israel and how people like Hosea refer to Israel as a married whore who's basically under control and had to wait for the return of the king. And until then had to act like a traditional wife, supposedly. So I just want to remind everybody, once again, don't forget the Lord, fear the Lord, have wonder, and desire to serve. Those are the keys. And I hope that you'll take that energy and you'll take that motivation and desire to serve, and you'll use it to defeat this enemy and force them to comply, to end this horror that they're conducting on earth once and for all, with this mission, of course. I'll say no more. But let's just say that I don't believe in an antichrist. I only believe in Christ. I don't believe in manifesting an antichrist, just like I don't believe in manifesting Armageddon. I believe that this ruler, the one that is to take that throne, the great king, despot of the blood of Zion, which is essentially the genetic line, will be benevolent, can be benevolent, and that the evil ones will have no control over this ruler. They cannot force this ruler to be cruel. And this ruler will rule with an iron glove, but it will be benevolent, like Catherine. And the power of God, ultimately, the Creator, will be supporting everything. And this is how the world will learn to comply with this extremely difficult task and mission that we have in front of us. I hope you guys appreciate the work we're trying to do here. All right. Again, for all these people that try to understand my situation, remember, if I didn't want to die, I wouldn't be doing this mission. Come on, they can't kill me, all right? They can't kill me. There's only one thing that can kill me, and that is my own broken heart, and if I have a heart attack. So hopefully that won't happen. If it does, maybe I'll be lucky I won't be around to have to ask you for money to pay for the doctor's bills. But if you want to help me out economically, because, living on that little bit I get from Social Security isn't really enough, and thank you to people that do help me, like I did get some from Catherine, I believe. Thank you so much. Again, PayPal is that evil mafia thing that I have nothing but that is Steven Kelley 714 at yahoo.com. You got to say friend or family or I will send it back. And law17gun at AOL.com is my email. That's LAW17GUN at AOL.com. Healings, big deal. Healings are going gonzo right now. If you want a healing, just ask. Send me your pictures. Send me your full name. Tell me what you need. If it's for somebody else, make sure I have all that information and their permission. If you want to be a Jedi, just ask. Join my group, Occupy the Getty / Steven D. Kelley. And that's on Telegram, of course. You got to join Telegram, obviously. Let's see. What else do I want to tell you? Again, I guess, I endeavor to pull myself out of this thing, but at the same time, to me, this is like the difference between having joy and not having joy. And I'll tell you one thing. If you want to turn somebody wicked, create an antichrist, I guess you want to take away the joy and sow a lot of bitterness and hatred. And I'm sure as hell I'm going to do my best to try to avoid being that person, because obviously service to others, love of the Lord is what we want. But at the same time, I'm either going to die doing this right now, or I'm going to take that damn throne under the Getty. That is the mission. Okay, people? I hope you understand. I hope you appreciate that. And I hope you realize that if all these bad things didn't happen, that this mission would not exist. That's the bottom line. So with that, I'm going to remind you once again that my name is Steven D. Kelley, and this is the Steven D. Kelley Show. And we are Truth Cat Radio, www.truthcatradio.com. Live on Thursday. The recording will be on a loop here for you after the show. Okay? All right, guys. I'll do my best to serve you better. And in the meantime, work with me. And yeah, I expect that my life will suck for the remainder. Okay? That's just the way it is. That thing that I need for joy, pretty sure it's gone for good. All right? I'm just telling you how it is. And so if I seem bitter all the time, people want to know, what the hell is wrong with him? Why are you so mean? Well, now you know. Okay? So hopefully that meanness will not turn me into that thing that we are trying not to manifest, but God willing. And I know how God works. I know that it always turns out for the best, that we will get the good stuff. Okay? All right, thanks for sticking around, and I'll look forward to talking to you and chatting soon. Okay? I'll talk to you again next week, hopefully, God willing. And with that, I will say good night, God bless, adios, and goodbye.